Over millions of years, nature carved and shaped the peaks and valleys of the planet's surface. Like huge hand-hewn sculptures, the mountains of the Earth seem indestructible. Yet there is a fragility here that is often overlooked. When the Earth slips and mountains move, disaster strikes swiftly and often without warning. Valleys below and the lives of those who live there are changed in an instant. In northeastern Italy, the rivers and valleys of the Italian Alps have been an important source of water and hydroelectric power for years. One of the largest hydroelectric systems is found in the Vajont Valley, about 100 kilometers north of Venice. Completed in 1960, the Vajont Dam is one of the highest dams of its kind in the world.
Vajont is an ideal place to build a dam. The gorge itself is very, very deep and very narrow. The dam that they constructed was 265 meters high, but only 160 meters wide at the top. So you can imagine it's very, very narrow, very steep, of good solid rock. But further up the valley from the dam, the valley opens right out, so it's maybe 1 or 1.5 kilometers wide and about 6 kilometers long. So they were able to impound a very, very large volume of water using a very small dam.
Perché la sua capacità era superiore a tutte le.
Its capacity was bigger than the total capacity of all the dams in the Bruno province put together. With 168 million cubic meters of water, it could provide water even during dry spells.
The valley is home to the many villages that line the banks of the Piave River or hug the base of the steep canyon walls. The largest town is Longarone, the economic hub of the valley. Residents view the dam with mixed feelings.
Le persone lì sapevano che il posto non era adatto per costruire una diga.
Knew the place was not right for the dam. The name of the mountain itself, Mount Toc, was for them an ill omen. But the fear in the community was moderated by all the reassurances that came from the experts and the geological surveys that were conducted.
Monte Toc causes builders of the dam the most concern. 6,000 feet high with near vertical cliffs, it is known as the mountain that walks. Studies show that a large area of the mountain is slowly creeping downward, centimeters at a time.
It is probable that geologists and engineers thought the mountain would come down little by little. So even if they would lose part of the basin, the main part of the project would be safe.
Officials are confident that they can control the movement of the landmass by carefully raising and lowering the water levels in the reservoir. October 1963. It has been raining since late September, and groundwater runoff is hampering attempts to lower reservoir levels. By October 8th, the creep of rock mass down Monte Toc has increased to 40 centimeters a day. The engineer in charge of the dam calls head office for permission to evacuate the area. He is told to stay calm and sleep with his eyes open. In the village of Casso, the mayor orders townspeople off the slopes and posts notices of an anticipated landslide.
I remember the previous afternoon because everyone was getting more and more anxious. They had started moving people from Mount Toc.
In the river valley below, it is business as usual in Longarone.
I know that Longarone at the time was a very lively, busy place. There was a movie theater, some bars. It was the biggest community in the valley, and people from neighboring valleys would converge there.
In 1963, I spent my last summer in Longarone. It was the best summer of my life. We were all young. I was 23. I had my whole life in front of me. And we were happy, even if we didn't have a lot.
October 9th, 1963 was a beautiful, calm fall day. That day, as usual, I went to teach in Inye. I remember in particular that afternoon we took the kids in grade 5 and other grades to a plateau above the town. I still remember that one of my colleagues told me that people were saying there was danger in Longarone.
By 10 o'clock that evening, it is raining again. Throughout the Vajont Valley, many residents have already gone to bed, including Giuseppe Sacchetti.
My sister and me were in our beds in the bedroom we shared, and a thin wall separated our room from our parents' bedroom.
In the village of Casso, Gervasia Matsuko watches her mother climb the northern slope of Monte Toc to gather the family's cow herd.
My mother left and I stayed with my grandmother. Grandma was worried. She was walking back and forth. We saw my mother being stopped at the dam. Then 2 men accompanied her to get my grandma's cows.
16-year-old Renato Magotti is at home in Longarone with his parents and brother.
I lived in the center of town. Some of the windows in our home faced the dam, so I looked at it almost every day.
At the dam site, 60 technicians and office staff monitor movement of the mountain. The reservoir is 2/3 full, holding about 135 million cubic meters of water. 10:41 p.m. Suddenly, without warning, giant slabs of rock break away from Monte Toc and begin their slide down the northern slope.
It almost certainly slid as 2 big coherent blocks, sliding very, very rapidly on a rock surface, so the rock was being exposed behind it.
It takes only 45 seconds for the immense mass of rock to slide down the slope of Monte Toc. It hits the reservoir like a huge stone in a basin of water.
The wave was divided in 3 parts. The first, and more powerful, went towards Casso and back to the lake. The second went towards Erto and then Pineda. The third part went towards Longarone. 50 million cubic meters of water were shot towards Longarone.
I remember a rumble that was getting louder, like that of a waterfall, but huge. A huge noise that filled the valley. A very loud noise to which I associated the collapse of the dam, the feeling that something terrible had happened.
October 9th, 1963. Just after 10:41 p.m., a huge landslide breaks away from Monte Toc in northern Italy's Vajont Valley. A mass of rock weighing 600 million tons plunges into the reservoir with a force that almost empties it. 60 workers at the dam site are killed instantly as waves of water spill out in 3 directions.
There's one particular town was located directly opposite the where the landslide moved and hit the lake, and this town is a town called Casso. Was perched high up on the opposite valley wall, and the air wave from the landslide blasted the windows out and hit the roofs of most of the houses. But in fact, the wave just missed, so the village wasn't actually hit by the wave.
My grandmother was yelling, telling me to run away, saying it was the end of the world. I instinctively ran uphill, and I don't remember seeing anybody else. I had only one thought in my mind, my mother, and I know now that I knew she was dead that night.
Some of the water generated by the slide pushes upstream towards villages in the reservoir's eastern shore.
Un'altra parte è andata verso Erto. Some of the water went towards Erto, and it didn't destroy it, since Erto was protected by a big rock formation. The rock protected Erto, but it redirected the water beyond the lake that was there.
Most of the water finds escape at the other end of the lake, where even the highest dam in the world cannot hold it back.
We think about 30 million cubic meters of water went over. The wave over the top of the dam was about 200 meters above the level of the dam itself, and then crashed down into the valley below.
The huge wave accelerates down the narrow valley towards the town of Longarone. The tide of water, mud, rock, and timber creates a powerful compression of air that travels ahead.
It has been calculated that it got to the end of the valley at 70 kilometers an hour, so it was very fast. The power of the blast that reached Longarone has been compared to 2 Hiroshima bombs.
Il vento ha distrutto le finestre, ha distrutto I tetti delle case.
The wind destroyed roofs and windows, destroyed houses, and killed most of the people because they were caught in the debris. The town was almost destroyed by this wind. The water made the destruction complete.
It was impossible to escape. I was in bed, under the covers. It was so sudden, and Longarone was completely destroyed, even before the water, by the wind. So I was lifted, with the house and everything. Then the water came and took away everything.
I remember ending up under the rubble, on my belly, only my head and part of my chest sticking out. And I raised my head to try and understand what was going on, where I was. And I remember, I couldn't see anything. It was all flat, no houses, nothing.
The flood of water, mud, and debris follows, tearing through Longarone.
It destroyed the whole historical downtown, 80% of it, and right there, almost 1,200 people died.
Paolo Munoren is staying at the home of his grandparents on the outskirts of Longarone. He is only 20 months old.
The windows were suddenly blown open by the wind. The water flooded the first floor completely and went up half the height of the second floor. My grandpa took us one by one to the second floor. That's how we survived.
There are other survivors. Although his parents and brother are killed instantly, Renato Magotti is spared.
My friend Renato was thrown about 100 meters from his house, but he was wrapped in his mattress, which protected him.
I remember finding Renato Magotti. We could hear him cry, and we moved the beams that covered him.
The mattress, in a way, saved me from flying objects. In some way, it saved me. It protected my body.
Giuseppe Sacchette and his sister are found half buried in debris 600 meters from what is left of their home in Longarone.
I remember hearing distant voices and seeing small lights, maybe torches. So I cried for help because I couldn't move. And then I knew a man was carrying me on his shoulders, up and down the rubble. My parents were never found.
The destruction of Longarone and surrounding villages is hard enough to accept in the darkness of night. In the light of dawn, it is much worse.
It wasn't until the next morning that the full magnitude of the disaster was apparent. But actually there was very little left of most of the villages that were hit. That they were hit by a wave of water, which was also carrying a lot of sediment, and the people were buried or washed away. And so there was very little chance of people being rescued.
C'era un mare di fango ricoperto di centinaia di corpi.
There was a sea of mud covered with hundreds of bodies. I was looking around me, looking for a landmark like the church or the train station, something. There weren't any landmarks anymore. Only the mountains were in place.
Un terremoto, un qualunque cataclisma.
Quake, a natural disaster leaves some traces of a town, but there was only a desert of stones, and the search for survivors was bound to be unsuccessful.
Many of the bodies found buried in mud and debris or tangled in the branches of trees are difficult to identify.
E poi per giorni e giorni sono venuto su in cerca dei miei familiari.
For days and days I would come to search for my relatives because it was necessary to find the bodies. The first one I found was my dad. I found him after 3 days, 26 kilometers from Longarone. My mother, I've identified her from pictures, from things she was wearing. Half her head was gone, so she was unrecognizable.
Mancava mezza testa, per cui era irriconoscibile.
In the cemetery of Fortonia, 766 crosses out of 1,466 don't have a name on them, so more than half of the people were not identified.
Almost 2,000 people died in the Vajont disaster, the majority of them in Longarone. I think more than 1,500 in Longarone, which was pretty much completely destroyed. Only one house was spared, up on the Pirago hill. I was in that house with my grandparents, luckily, and that's why I survived.
Those who do survive do not face the tragedy alone. Neighbors from the surrounding areas assist in the search for survivors. American helicopters help with evacuation.
One of the remarkable things about the disaster was the fact that the dam, in fact, withstood this event. And all that occurred was the top metre or so of the dam was eroded away by the wave. But it's actually an incredible testament to the quality of the engineering that the dam was able to survive the accident.
A government inquiry cites the reservoir as the cause of the slide, but blames bureaucratic inefficiency and the withholding of important information for the terrible magnitude of the tragedy.
There's no doubt that that a certain amount of blame has to be placed upon the engineers who were involved in the project. They designed the dam extremely well, but they didn't understand what was actually occurring in the valley walls.
Questo immenso bacino di acqua è andato a...
That huge water reservoir had changed geological equilibrium that was created in time. Water not only weighs and exercises pressure, it also infiltrates the soil and gets the base of the mountains wet. Getting wet, the clay soil that constituted the lower part of the mountain under the landslide became slippery and started the sliding movement of the whole landslide into the lake.
L'immensa frana verso il lago.
Even if it was impossible to foresee the actual damages and gravity of what was to come, they could have evacuated everybody. And this is what gives the people from the area a lot of grief.
4 years after the disaster, 11 engineers and officials of the Vajont project are brought to trial. The court finds 3 of the men guilty of multiple manslaughter and acquits the rest. Reconstruction of the valley is painfully slow. The village of Veneto is rebuilt in a different location, and a similar plan is set for Longarone. When survivors protest, it is rebuilt in its original location, but it can never be the same.
It was not possible to rebuild Longarone because the people were not there anymore. The people who lived in Longarone today are people from neighboring towns who moved to Longarone after the disaster. But the social structure of the previous Longarone was missing. The people were not there. They were dead.
Personalmente devo dire che dentro non sono più come prima. Personally, I have to say that inside I am not the same person. I am not the way I used to be. When I go to sleep at night, my mind always goes to the memory. Every night, the same thing.
Disaster can strike at any time, often without warning. It can happen in the blink of an eye, but its legacy can last forever. In Italy, the Vajont Dam is also a tribute of sorts. It still stands, but has not been used as a source of hydroelectric power since the 1963 tragedy. The mass of rock and rubble in the reservoir makes that impossible.
La diga è rimasta là. È un monumento.
So the dam stands there. It's a huge reinforced concrete monument to both human ingenuity that managed to build such a big and strong thing that withstood nature's impact, and human stupidity that defies nature knowing what's in store, thus causing 2,000 deaths.
Quello che poteva andare incontro ha voluto lo stesso sfidare la natura, provocando 2000 morti.
Io ho desiderato tante volte di essere stato a Longarone quella notte.
Many times I've wished I had been in Longarone that night. I wished I hadn't survived because what I felt was extremely painful. A pain that lasts. It's not a suffering that fades with time. It stays with us.